How would I list a property? I'm an attorney. I'm not a realtor. I did pass my sales license though, Mike, so that's good. But not a realtor because it's not a license that I'm actively using. What I wanted this class to be about was how might an attorney list a property? And so what I would love for the agents to do is steal things that they're not currently doing that you think will drive value. And some things you'll have a better solution for. Feel free to put that in the comments, raise your hand. I can unmute you and you can kind of share your experiences. But Mike, have you ever seen a lawyer try to sell their own house?
Yeah, the New York and Miami ones are the ones I really worry about.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. You and me both. You and me both.
I'm joking with that, but yeah, it's always interesting when an attorney is involved with their own sale.
Yeah, it can be problematic, and I mean it in the sense of every type of profession has a unique skill set or an education or a mindset even that can add value or potentially detract. And as long as you don't let it detract, hopefully you guys will find this really helpful and interesting. But let me pull up my email from this morning. That way we can go through the different things. Let's see. Of course, now I don't have it. Oh, well. That happens, right? That happens. I wonder if I have it somewhere else. That's okay. Oh, well. Well, you guys are here. That's the important part. All right. So this class was kind of inspired by an agent that I was talking to last week. And she had her book. And trial attorneys, a lot of lawyers, they have their trial book, and it's all their information they might ever want. And sometimes that book becomes a suitcase, and you'll see the attorneys walking in with their suitcases in that very sense. So what I wanted is said, let's take that and let's use it. Let's build the book so that you guys can have the same kind of success. Build this process and understand kind of what can you add to your book? What are things that you might want to add? So first and foremost, when I would look at a property, the first thing I look at is the county appraiser website. And so we're going to talk specifically about Lee County and Collier County. And the first one on here that I'm sharing my screen is Collier County. And so I realize that a lot of realtors tend to skip this step, and instead they'll use the MLS functions. So they'll go on MLS and they'll pull the report. And what that does, here, the problem that I see is it's an aggregator. So it's going to aggregate information from public records, from the MLS elsewhere, and it's going to try and put them all into one place. And what that leads to is potentially bad information. So any chance you can, you have to go right to the source. Just like when we talk about reading the contract and going to the section that we're referring to, I kind of want you to have that same process for your listings. So what I would do first, and we're going to use Collier County as the example. So it's collierappraiser.com. I'm going to search the database. And you'll see there are 6 different options for searching a database. And a lot of times the easiest is just the address. But there's a little trick. So they tell you here, enter a full or partial address. And my suggestion is partial is always going to be the best. And so let me give you the example. So let's say we're looking for my property. You meet with me. I know it's 1860, and I start typing. Oh, there it is. Perfect. So I can pull it up that way. Or if I wanted to search owner, I'm going to type in the person's name. And then because I don't want to kind of miss something, I might just leave it at that. And then I'll go through and see, oh, there's Don and Coletta Ross. There's Walter Ross. There's Thomas Jr. Ross. I don't know who that would be. And then if you keep looking, there's 16 of these. So maybe that's not the best way to do it. So let's go back. We'll go to owner again. Hey, that looks like me. So we'll pull that up. And now you have a kind of the listing as the county sees it. And this website is wonderful because it gives a lot of good information that many people don't use, but they should. So we've got my name. Oh, look, we've also got my wife. Got an address, so my mailing address. You know that this is my primary, this is where I have all my mail sent because this is my mailing address. And then the site address is up here. The contracts always ask for the tax ID, or a lot of them do. Theirs is right there. And then what they all ask for is the legal description. So hopefully what you guys are doing is that you actually take the legal as listed on the Collier County or the Lee County Appraiser website, just copy and paste and put it right into your contract. However, you can go one step further. Let's make sure I am sharing the newest screen here.
I don't have anything on my screen.
Yeah, neither do I.
How about now? Can you see
I
anything
do now. Yep, I got it now.
That's weird. I don't know why that was doing. I apologize. All right. So this is my deed from when I bought the property. And let's get back. Oh, that must have been a little bit of a glitch. So here's our
Oh,
county
it's me.
appraiser website. Can you see that, Mike?
Yep.
Okay. So this is just the tip of the iceberg, but it's a great website. You've got your legal description. And then down here on the bottom left, you've got all the deeds that are recorded over the years, going back to 1982. We click on 1982. See if I'll have to now change our screen.
They sold it for $35 then.
What was that?
They sold it for $35 then in 82.
That's crazy. It says 0. Actually, it's a 0. I don't know what. So this was a deed from one person into a husband and wife as co-trustees.
Yeah.
And so, and then here's your legal description, lot 11, block 398. So when we're doing the title work, this is what we're going to be looking for. But the key on this, and the reason why I wanted to pull this up, is that when we zoom in, we can actually see how the owners took the title. And it's right here, Dudley Godfrey Jr. and William B. Murphy as co-trustees of the Nancy B. Parker Irrevocable Trust. So that whole thing, that's our owner. That's who the seller will be. But on tax records and in MLS, it's not going to show all that. It's going to do some shortened version. You'll see it say et al. Or something along those lines. It may not even reference that it's a trust. So you have to dig into the deed in order to see all the details of how the seller owns the property. The interesting thing is that it also talks about an undivided 10% interest in something else. Oh, and that's what they were deeding out. So this was definitely a weirder deed.
There's an out-of-state attorney who did this deed, so you're missing trust powers, which happens a lot too.
Well, and that's not a defect necessarily, right, Dad? That
No.
it just kind of makes it difficult for the current owner to then sell later.
Right.
So I think this is a really good option. In fact, let's click on my deed when I took title and see if I share the screen again. Sorry for all the different screens. So we have our deed here. It's going to show the consideration, so what we paid for it. And here, when we look at Christian Neil Ross and Jessica R. Ross, husband and wife. So what that does is it creates tenants by the entireties. What does that do, Dad? Why is that important when kind of thinking about selling or listing a property?
Well, you need both signatures, but realistically, if you predecease Jess, she automatically owns it. You're considered one person under the law.
Yeah, so the example that you and I talk about is you go to a listing appointment and one of them is missing. You're like, well, where's Christian? They go, well, he died last year. You have to account for this. Say, well, I looked at the deed. I saw that Christian was on there. Now we want to look at how did they hold title? And in this case, husband and wife. So
which is entirety. So you don't have to get anybody other than Jessica in this case. And we record a death certificate, at the closing with an affidavit.
Exactly. So it's a very important part of it, because when I answer these questions, and a lot of listing agents will call us when they take a listing and they'll say, hey, I pulled the tax records and I saw that it's husband and wife on there. I said, well, let's look at the deed and double check that it actually is listed that way. It's a very important part of that process.
If there are tenants in common, which you see a lot down here, because people are just very wealthy, now you have a probate issue on dead Christian.
So tenants in common would be if they didn't reference husband and wife. If it said something, let's say it was Christian Ross, a single man, and Jessica R. Ross, a single woman. If it said something like that, then the state assumes that it is tenants in common, which means it's not transferred automatically upon someone's passing. So in that same listing appointment, you now notice that Christian is missing, and you say, well, where's Christian? Well, he passed away. And well, did you happen to go through the probate process for his estate? And they say, hopefully they would say yes. And the kind of the best advice I can give you in that scenario is ask these generalized questions. Can you provide me, the probate documents so I can share it with the attorney? Can you tell me what happened and what have you done since he passed away, so that you can get the full story. And the trick is that a lot of sellers assume they did enough. And when they may not have, they may assume, oh, well, it was in the will that everything was going to his wife. And that's great, but you can't assume when you're taking on the burden of trying to list the property. We have to actually verify that information is true and accurate. And you want to make sure it's actually seen on there. So someone mentions in the comments, not all the deeds show the purchase price. The deeds don't usually show the purchase price, but what they will show is when it's recorded up at the top.
Doc stamps.
It'll show doc stamps, and the county will specify what was paid for doc stamps. So if you look at this top part of this deed, it says consideration $1,070,000, or above it says doc at 70 cents, $7,490. Dad, what's the formula for calculating doc stamps?
It's $7 per thousand, and some of the old deeds won't show the consideration, so you can just do the division and figure out what the consideration was.
Exactly. So it's in this. The easiest way to think about it is $7 per thousand, but it's like 70 cents per hundred, which I don't know who came up with that. Maybe when prices were a lot lower. But yeah, you could calculate. All right, if they paid $7,490. Let's multiply that by 7 or 700 or 7,000, and you figure out your consideration. But in the body of the deed, you'll actually see $10 or $100 typically. You'll see it here. Witness that said grantor foreign consideration the sum of 10 and no dollars and other good and valuable consideration. That's just to create a legally binding contract. Isn't that your thought on that, Dad?
Yeah, I usually tell people it's left over from a British common law. You have to recite something, and so they just do $10 and other good and valuable consideration. You don't have to give the exact price technically. You just have to receive the consideration. So it's really a carryover from the common law. But again, you can get the numbers from looking at the upper left-hand corner if you really want them.
See if that answered everyone's questions. Yeah, that's good. Keep asking those questions. I think that's awesome. So let me show you really quickly. We won't spend a ton of time on it, but Lee County has the same thing. So if we go back to the Lee County website, this is leepa.org. Do a database search, and you can search by the strap number, owner name, or street address. I don't own anything in Lee County, but let's see who does with my last name. Again, less is more in this sense. So if you've got 180 West 39th Street, you could be careful. You have to be careful because West could be W, it could be WEST, or there could be no West. It could be put at the end of the address. So how they index it could make it challenging for you to find some of these properties. But they've got a list of properties. You find the one you wanted. Oh, I know, that's a long lost cousin, right, Dad? Anna Rude.
We actually have cousins up there, Christian. Believe it or not.
That's Anna Rude Ross. All right,
No,
so
that's not one of them.
that's not one of them.
No.
So this property, you'd find it. It is helpful because it has an overlap of the tax map with satellite images. So you generally can get a feel for where the property is and how big it is. This is actually a pretty unique property if you look at the aerial views. And then if you go down to sales transactions, it has the same thing. So in 2018, there was a deed, and you would click this button and it would pull up the actual deed. And so you could actually find the quitclaim deed. It has instrument numbers where it's recorded. In fact, on this one, it shows that there was only 70 cents paid for documents. And what that means is that there was no value paid, or $10 was paid, or maybe was that $100 was paid for this. But in this case, you've got it to Ross Anarud, a single man. So he's the owner. You've got no wife mentioned on here, and no other life estates or things like that.
They were probably the trustee for this guy, if I had to guess.
Yeah, probably. There is some, this looks like it was a short sale, if I were to guess, some REO purchase. So I think that, so that's step number one. Mike, and I think I've put you to sleep already. Do your research. You know, there's a lot more to it than just relying simply on the MLS side of it. So that's very helpful. The key though is, all right, well, now what do I do with it? So let's say you did pull up a property and it's in someone's trust. You gotta pull the trust documents. Where do we find those? How do we get them? You got to ask the seller. Seller's going to have trust documents, unless, Dad, you mentioned trust powers. What are trust powers?
There's a statute 689.071 that if trust powers are on the deed, you don't need to look at the trust. So if those powers are there, I generally don't want to see the trust, because sometimes the trust conflicts with what's on the deed, and we don't want to know that. Where you see it a lot is when people buy something down here and then they go back to their home state, and their estate planner will flip it in the revocable trust, and they don't know about 689.071. It's not their fault. It's just a unique thing to Florida.
Yeah. Well, and for the listing agent out there, you pull the deed, you see that it's held by a trust. What you really should do is maybe call the attorney and say, hey, you know, I see that there's a trust here. Does everything look okay? And we could even point out, hey, it has trust powers. As long as Anthony and Tara are available to sign, that's what you need. You don't need to see the actual trust. But let's say there aren't trust powers, or if the person listed on the deed has passed away, what do we do then, Dad? How do we get, who do we get to sign?
If there are no trust powers, we
right?
absolutely have to see the trust. And if it's a foreign trust, we need to make sure it, you know, we might have to get somebody from that state involved, but that's when you ask for the trust. When there are no trust powers, because usually the underwriter at a minimum will ask for us to record excerpts of the trust, you know, with an affidavit.
And it's similar like that with an LLC. You're not going to have trust powers, obviously, but if you notice that it's in an LLC, we have to ask, all right, let's look at the LLC documents. Mike, have you ever been on the Secretary of State website by chance?
I really haven't, to be honest.
So it's actually pretty helpful, and so might as well use this while we have some time. So I just searched, and I don't even know the name. I think it's Sunbiz, but I searched Florida SOS, which is Secretary of State, and you have to determine what state the LLC or corporation is formed. But here, let's assume it's Florida, you can go in here, do the name. And so we'll do a prompt for our law firm, Ross Law. And you'll see there are a lot of them on here, and you got to find the right one. So it's not Ross Law Firm, it's just Ross Law, not Ross Lawn. Do you see that one, Dad? That'll be the next one.
That wasn't me.
Ross Lawn. So you'll notice here, this is all public record. Basically has our address, and down here it shows who the names of the officers on here. So it's got both of us on here. So if let's say our company was selling something, the safest thing to do is to have both officers sign a sales agreement or a listing contract. And you go right here, and it even has their title. So vice president or president. If it was an LLC, it should say manager or member. And so again, the safest thing, do all of it, have everyone sign. But if you can't get all of it, that's when you call the attorneys and you say, hey, Joe won't sign or can't sign. What do we do now? And there are a lot of, that's when we really dig in. We have to figure out what's going on. We might have to read a partnership agreement or something like that. And there's a lot of information in here. Someone said they going back to Lee County, that they like the Lee County website a lot better. Yeah, there's a lot to like about the Lee County website for sure. It even has like the exemptions listed in here. So on this particular property that we were looking at, it talks about the homestead exemptions, so that you can tell, was this the seller's homestead, their primary residence? And in this case, it says it is. So they're getting the homestead exemptions, the property tax exemptions. So most likely it is their principal residence. What does that mean, Dad? So let's say it's someone's homestead and I'm the only one on the title, but I'm married, and I'm married. So it says Christian Ross, a married man, but my wife isn't on the title. What do we do then? Do I need the spouse to sign, or can I?
Oh, absolutely. And going back also to those trusts, if you're checking, who the trustee is, that's good. You have trust powers, that's wonderful. Then you check exemptions and you find out it's homestead. Well, you need the spouse. You need the spouse, whether she's on it or he's on it. Period. End of story.
Yeah, the safest thing is to always have the spouse sign, even if they're not on title. But in the very least, if it's their homestead, then you need the spouse to sign. So you'd get both of them. If it wasn't the homestead, then you don't need them. You just need who's listed on the title. So that kind of covers the big part of it. So when you walk into a listing appointment, you've already done your research, and you can actually kind of prompt the client to look at these things and say, oh, wow, you really know your stuff, as opposed to trying to convince them by looking at your resume or something along those lines. Other nice thing about this website, and that we'll continue on the Lee County version, is you should probably pull taxes. Let's pull taxes and let's look at all this. Couple of things on here. You can sign up to get bills by email. So you can, let's say it's a new purchase, your client just bought something. You may want to tell them about this website and say, hey, look, I'll sign you up for emails because I know you spend, half the year elsewhere, and you're worried about maybe losing or missing a bill. Also, what you do is you look on here to see, was it paid? So luckily, this property, they've paid all their tax bills going back many, many years. So this is not a problem. But I actually had a listing last week where we pulled up and there were 2 tax bills that hadn't been paid. And the seller was incredibly grateful because, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize it hadn't been paid. I think it was their kids were trying to help dad, and dad had missed the last 2 years. So imagine what that kind of experience would be like and how scary it is. But when the agent were to bring that to their attention, it just drives a ton of value for that client. And they'd be silly not to hire you at that point.
But sometimes they do it differently back home too. If they come from Oklahoma or someplace, they do it differently, and they just don't know they're supposed to file taxes when they're supposed to down here.
Exactly. The other thing I thought was interesting is tax estimator. So this is where some people can get themselves in a little bit of trouble. So let's assume, this property that we were looking at, the county was estimating the property's worth about $200,000. I think that's where it is. So $200,000, taxes are going to be, might as well look. So tax bills, the taxes, I think I remember seeing there was something over $2,000, so maybe 1% of what the county thinks it's worth. Yeah, taxes were just over $2,000 in 2022. But if we go back to that tax estimator, let's say, for example, this property is actually worth $500,000. So all we have to do when we're talking to a buyer, or if you're a listing agent and the buyer's questioning, hey, what are the taxes? You could legitimately tell the buyer, yeah, the taxes were about $2,000, maybe $2,100, but that's not the full story. What you really want to do is put the real number, what the list price is or what the offer would be, and say, look, if you were to spend $500,000, the assessed value would probably be about $450,000. The millage rate on this particular house is almost 12. So your estimated taxes are about 5,400. And then if you do the homestead exemption, it would go down another $400 from there. That is so much value, where a lot of people get it wrong. A lot of people don't realize that the taxes don't just keep going in that. They're not relevant what the seller is paying and what the buyer would pay.
Oh, this really protects the realtor in situations where the owner owned the property for a really long time and it's homestead.
Yeah.
So, even though you're telling your buyer what the taxes were last year, the person might have owned the property for 26 years. So there'll be a big, huge bump because the homestead.
And Dad, you and I talked about that on our houses. And Mike, your taxes are low. You've been in your property for how long?
20 some years. Actually, I found out something interesting. We, way back when, bought 3 lots in a row. And I just paid the tax bill every year. And then I realized, 5, 6 years into it, that the one piece where the house was homesteaded and the other 2 pieces were not homesteaded. I didn't pick up on that, but then I went down to the county and
joined them
all into one piece.
Yeah. So what's wild, Mike, is that I would guess that that's what this owner did at some point in the past. So you can tell this property is maybe 3 parcels that have all been put together. There's only one house, but 3 parcels that maybe were merged at one point. And the homestead is protecting the whole thing. So they did similar to what you did. They've got homestead on all 3 properties, which limits the increase in the assessed value to 3% maximum every year. If they didn't have that, they would probably cap the increases on the parcel that the house is on, but then the other 2 parcels could go up a lot more. And so instead of a $2,000 tax bill combined, it might be a $3,500 tax bill, something like that. So for a buyer, this is still very valuable. But remember, it will always reset anytime there's a sale. So if you sell it for $500,000, you could expect taxes like this. Now, this is a wonderful tool. If you're in Lee County, it's awesome. And if you're in Collier County or any other county, you could still use this. Just realize that the millage rate will be different for every different area. So my house, for example, Collier County, going back here, my millage rate is a total of 10.14. So instead of taking their number, which was almost 12, my taxes are actually lower per dollar of value. So take that into consideration. This would definitely drive you back to your real estate school to make sure you know how to calculate millage rate, but it's tax amount per $1,000 of assessed property value. So if you have 500,000 or 450 in this case times 12, you come up with that $5,000 number. So I think that's really cool. Let's get into the next thing that I would look at. And what you can tell up until this point, we haven't even talked to the client. This is all public information. All right, so this is a website that you guys should really like. I'm going to put it in the chat so that you can copy it and put it into your browser and make a bookmark, because I think it's that good. This is Collier County permits. So here's the trick on this. The first one, you have to just put in whatever, and then you got to do their little sign in. All right, now we can do whatever we want. So let's search, I don't know, let's look Main Street. We'll just put in Main. Let's see if anything pops up. Yes, lots of main streets. All right, so we typed in your property address that you're looking at from a listing side, and we're going to click on one of them. Let's see what this property holds for us. Okay, so these are all the code enforcement complaints on this one. So you're going to want to go into this. Now you're going to be wide open on this one.
Boy, there's a lot of complaints.
There's a lot of complaints on this one, going back even just to 2021. I think I hit the jackpot on this one. So flutter flags. I don't know if this person's maybe doing political things, or maybe they're trying to sell stuff out of business. I'm writing a complaint due to a roadside sale. So this is something that'll really prepare you for going into a listing.
This is not a happy neighborhood.
They're very upset with this seller. Maybe that's why the seller is selling.
See, this is useful.
Litter. They're talking about a lot of litter, junk automotive parts, It's a fun one. But this is what I really intended to get into, which is the permit applications. So these are all the permits that have been pulled for signs, for looks like a propane tank. This is some sort of parking
These open
area.
permits, Christian?
These look like, yeah, these are mechanical, electrical, plumbing, gas, and fire permits. Now, luckily, finalized and complete, all good signs. So in that scenario, nothing to be too concerned about, very helpful information. We can keep going down, and these are special event permits. We probably don't have to worry about these unless there are fines. So these are just temporary use permits. You know, if for some reason the property was unique like this one, and the buyer would be interested in buying it for that reason, like having some sort of pop-up restaurant location, you might want to see, all right, have all the any permits ever been denied and why? That could be helpful. But this is one of those things that's like, wow, this is, you know, a lot of information, some good, some bad. We'll pick another one, see if it's a little more, you know, muted. Let's see. I'll pick this one on the bottom. All right, more code enforcement. And if any of these weren't closed, let's say there was still a pending fine. Oh, look here, this one's open. Complaint, North Collier Fire Control and Rescue District, running bar and nightclub without all Collier County authorizations or permits. So if you're buying this property, you might need to call the county and see about it, but at least the permits are done. This must be a particular area that I'm not as familiar with. So I think that's really interesting. Very helpful.
At minimum, Christian, you're finding out that the county is looking very closely at this property, and you might be stepping into a mess.
You might be stepping in the mess, or it just educates us too, right?
Yeah.
This could be it could be something pretty simple. If I did a search on your house, might as
Please know
well.
that I got open permits. I don't need that.
Oh, we don't need to see that. Well, so let's look at that actually. Let's see. Stop that. And I want to show you guys how my company verifies permits, like how we make sense of all this.
Unless you want a Kayla McCann story.
Let's see here. So on my desktop, we actually have a permit status for bulletins.
Oh.
So
We have that statute for open permits.
So this is a bulletin that Collier County put out to kind of explain what all of these different statuses actually mean, because cancel and canceled actually mean different things. So this permit status requires additional research to be closed out, and this one's been canceled with proper documents and nothing else is needed. So it's not as simple as it might look, but that's okay. The key would be go on to the permit search, see what you can find. And if you have trouble with it, that's when you reach out to us and we'll do it with you. There are some other ones. So City of Naples has a different one, and Lee County has a different one. Bonita Springs has a different one. They're not all public, but the Collier County, City of Naples are. I think Bonita and Lee County might have to pay money for that information, but reach out to me and I might be able to help as well. But it gives you something to talk about with your client. So yes, Collier County has it, and that's what I put in the, let's see if I can answer that one. Does Collier County have an estimate for taxes? I'm not sure. I don't think I've seen it for Collier County, but that would be really interesting. Let me see if I can share my screen. Let's look at while we're all on this together. All right, so you can definitely sign up for bills by email. It doesn't look like there is an estimate, but again, the key is that you would take my millage rate and multiply it by the 1,000. So if you think my house is worth $1 million, you would, let's do a simpler number. Let's say you thought the property is worth 500,000. You take 500 and multiply it by 1,000. And so that's not right, is it? You multiply it by the millage rate, which is 10. So you take 500 times 10.14, which would be just over, you know, that $5,000 number. So that's kind of how you would think about it. And then if you had exemptions, if you had an agricultural exemption or a senior or disability exemption, that assessed value could come down even further from the 500,000 number. That makes sense, Mike. You're kind of, I mean, what, from your perspective, you go to a seller and you're trying to get their business, you're trying to get their listing. You know, as a salesman, the things that you do are pretty straightforward. What are you gonna do? You're gonna do comps and you're gonna, you know, look at the neighborhoods, you're gonna see what the properties sell for. But this could also provide a lot of value as well, because you're kind of bringing up things that not everyone looks at.
Actually, and you got lucky on that one piece you picked up that had all the violations and complaints, et cetera. It does tell you that when you potentially have a new listing coming in, a little research on that might give you a great insight into whether or not you even want that listing.
It could,
I
yeah,
mean,
it could.
you could be jumping into a mess.
Yeah, could be a problem neighborhood.
Yeah. So that was interesting when you pulled that up.
Yeah, that one was a wild one. Someone asked me, does Marco Island have one of these? And it does. The city of Marco Island has a website. It's just the standard one. And then you can search for your property address. And what's really great about this, in fact, let's do it, because I did this when I bought my house and I thought it was very valuable. So we were looking at Collier County, but let's look at City of Marco. And it's citizen self-service. In fact, you can look at permits here and you can go through the portal. But the other cool thing is if you just type in the address, I haven't done this since I bought it. Oh, here it is, elevation certificate. So if you notice, I put in my address into the search feature and it came up with an elevation certificate. So an elevation certificate, it just tells you where is your house built in comparison to the base flood elevation, which is very relevant information for flood insurance and flooding in general. So this was the elevation certificate that the city has on file for my particular property. And I'm so glad someone asked me about City of Marco, because I think this is huge. Not every municipality keeps this information. But the city also had blueprints for me when we bought the house. So we got blueprints, we got the elevation certificates, permitting, we got who the contractors were and how much was paid, how much the job was supposed to cost. And the county or the city was just an open book about it. I could have gone to the county as well. I could have talked to their FEMA person as well. But you'll notice B8 flood zone X. I mean, how unique that is. I love that. This was done a while ago. My property is unique because the lowest adjacent finish grade of my property is at 26 feet. So it's a very elevated part of Marco. And the top of the bottom floor is 27 feet. So when we had our storm, we didn't really have the same issues with water that a lot of other properties did. Yeah, we got very lucky, but this is something that, you know, the seller didn't have this. This was over 20 years ago, and he no longer had access to this information. So I just pulled it myself. And again, you come to your listing appointment, or if you're first showing the property, that's a game changer in my mind. That shows someone who is organized and focused and like, look, I'm not here to mess around. This is a job for me, not a hobby. This stuff is really, really great. And so if you have questions about how to interpret this information, please don't hesitate to ask. What you should get with this is probably the survey. In this case, the city did have a copy of the survey as well, which was amazing. So I didn't even ask the seller for that stuff. It was really, really helpful. And there's a whole list of elevation certificates. There's not one for every property, but most properties do have them. So I haven't talked about it yet because I've kind of focused on my property, but the big fish on listing appointments, HOAs and condo associations. Yikes, right? So there's always going to be questions about these. And what I would want in any listing is we got to have all the information we can get. We need to verify that it's correct as much as possible. So how would I explain this? So we've got two statutes in Florida, one for HOAs and one for condos, and they require different things. Dad, can you give me the quick elevator speech on the requirements of a condominium specifically? Do they have to give fees that something we need to know about?
There's a fee for the application. The way I explain it, condominiums were around for a very, very long time. When I was in law school in the late 70s, the condo statute 718 existed. There was no HOA statute. So the old person in the room is the condominium statute and all the requirements under 718, which require delivery of 7 sets of documents, which we have in standard I of the NABOR contract. There's 7 things listed, and you have to deliver these things for it to be effective. The HOA was a new thing that they created in 1993, I believe, a new statute, 720, which did not follow the condo model. It came up with its own model with a 1-page summary of what they thought the buyer should know at a minimum. So it's very minimal compared to what the condo statute requires.
Yeah. So again, this is a very helpful topic for us because again, this is from the perspective of an attorney, but you have to remember you're also a salesperson and you can't forget that. So from an attorney's perspective, the HOA requirements are minimal. You said, right, Dad? It's 1 page.
Oh, it's close to useless. I mean, it's just 1 page, and you get the quarterly maintenance, any special assessments. Is there a land lease? And then if you look at it, I think it's paragraph 7 and 8. It'll tell you there's much more information in the public records or with the management company, and you really should look at that if you think it's important. So they really give you next to nothing.
Yeah, so here's the form. This is the statutory minimum regarding
Comes right out of
HOAs.
720, this form.
So this is statutory minimum. Now, this is a NABOR form in the sense that they've just put the NABOR name on it.
I mean, paragraph 10 was added, but everything else is out of the statute.
Bar has the same form. Is it rider B? There's rider A and there's rider B.
Comprehensive rider B for HOAs and comprehensive rider A for condominiums.
So rider B, the first page matches this almost exactly. But then FARBAR does have additional information that it's asking about, is there approvals and this and that. It does add additional things that they almost are expecting the seller to fill out. So if you're for the first time using FARBAR, or if it's the first time using NABOR, realize that these forms are somewhat different. NABOR is the bare minimum and FARBAR is a little bit more than the bare minimum.
Yeah. NABOR, you don't have to fill in one single blank. And FARBAR,
well, you do. No, you do. You've got your fees.
H and I?
Yeah, you've got fees, but
on the form,
I had someone ask me this morning, does the seller have to disclose the transfer fee on an HOA? And the answer is no.
No.
The statutory minimum does not require the HOA fees to be disclosed. Should you? Yes, but how you do it is almost just as important. Do you put it in a seller disclosure? Do you just have it available? Do you place it in the MLS listing? I would say you're balancing the idea of not getting it wrong and creating some liability. Like if you said it was $1,500, but it was really $2,500, you don't want the seller to have to eat it just because you're trying to do something nice. But you also don't want to not disclose it. You'd almost want to say something in the middle where you say the HOA transfer fee is approximately $1,500, but may have been increased recently. Buyers should, do their own due diligence to confirm the total amount, something like that.
I mean, I lots of times, Christian, I'll get the number, I'll call somebody at the management company and I'll get a name and a phone number and they'll tell me it's $100, say. And then I'll just email the client and say, Joe Blow at the management company, and here's his phone number, says $100, but please call and confirm I may have gotten it wrong.
Exactly. So we're going to say try and stay away from it being in the contract.
Well, you're trying to, insulate yourself a little bit, and here's the name and number, and double check, make sure I'm not wrong. And if I could look at 8 and 9 in this summary form, that refers to that this is just summary in nature. And a lot of this is in the public record. So if you want to get into the restrictive covenants and the use restrictions and all that good stuff, like we normally do with condos, you can do so. So this is nothing compared to what condominiums require.
All right. So to that point, someone asked, can we use this form to show quarterly condo dues, or do not have to disclose quarterly dues for a condo? You don't have to disclose quarterly condo dues by statute. The neighbor form, there is no disclosure for condominium fees at all. But FAR does include some disclosure items for condominium.
Comprehensive Rider A gets into it.
Rider A gets into it a little bit more. Now, could the seller just not include that information? Could they cut out page 2 and 3? Yes. But it's really about expectations, doing it the right way, disclosing if you can, but protecting your seller also. So to this question, I would not use the HOA form to disclose assessments and special assessments. And I just would stay away from it because the condo is not an HOA and the HOA is not a condo. They're just different. If you want to disclose it separately, maybe in other terms and conditions, you could say transfer fee of approximately blank, assessments are approximately $1,500 a quarter. Buyer should verify directly with the property manager, something like that. That would be fine, or you just put it in the email. I think that would be good too.
FAR and Comprehensive Rider requires you to disclose this stuff, and also things that have been on the agenda in the last 12 months.
Right.
Again, with neighbor, if you do what I suggested earlier, and the management, I spoke to the guy at the management company, here's his name, here's his phone number. They say they've been talking about a special assessment because of Ian. Please call and confirm. So it's not you authenticating the accuracy of the number. You're
Right.
putting the burden back on the buyer to do some
You're putting the
digging.
burden back on the buyer. And so to that point, someone asked, isn't the condo fee included in the FAQs page of the condo docs? Usually that's what the FAQs will include, but there's no statutory requirement as to what the FAQs have to have from what I know. So there are times when the fees aren't as transparent. It may be missing a fee. It may not have been updated since they added a rental fee or a new account fee. So yes and no. And then someone else says, I would say a listing agent, this is great advice, a listing agent for a condo, that they should definitely be asking if there are any specific pending litigation in the association. Suing the developer or the insurance company are two good examples, as well as understanding what, if any, pending assessments are in place. Absolutely. What you'll notice, the condo forms, the condo disclosures, they don't ask these questions in advance. It just says what is going to be buyer responsibility, what is seller responsibility. So this is very tough topic that you can't just assume. You kind of have to do the research. And this sort of information, this sort of gathering of facts can be really powerful. And what I saw someone do recently is they actually called the listing agent of another property in the same community, said, hey, I see your property over here. What's it been like? I'm going to be listing down the street. Have you had a lot of feedback? And hey, can you confirm what you found out of the condo association fees, the HOA fees? Because here's what I was told, and I don't know if that's right or not. That would be, I think that's amazing research. And maybe you don't do that before meeting with the seller on a listing appointment, but you certainly would think about having that information or that conversation before going live or before really accepting contracts. It'll just educate you in a much more complete way.
When dealing with buyers, I always try to get them to call, because there's so many things they need to know about the nature of the association. Do the people get along? Do they have social functions? Were there any insurance claims? Were there, how would we do with Ian? Any special assessments that people are even talking about around the coffee table?
Yeah.
And I preface it with, a lot of these folks are up north. And I said, at some point in the summertime, you're going to need to call somebody at the association to let people in to put in a new hot water heater or deliver furniture. And wouldn't it be nice to kill two birds with one stone, get that phone number now and learn all there is you want to know about what life is like in that particular association? Do people like each other? Are they friendly?
Well, and I think that's a huge part of it, but even simpler, you got to have the condo documents, the rules, the bylaws, the FAQs, the budgets. And so I see it maybe way too often where the listing agent doesn't have that information before going live. They should have it when they go before they go live with the listing. They should have all their condo documents. in the ready. They can put it in MLS or not. So that's either way is fine, but it should be already in their hands and ready to send to any prospective buyers. Hey, here's the documents, updated governance form included.
Yes.
Everything should be done ahead of time. Don't wait until you have a contract to get that, start getting that information together, because you're working behind the eight ball in that sense. Mike, the last part I wanted to talk about is more just the personal side of working with your seller. You know, now let's say assume you've got the listing, the seller is going to hire you or already has. What I like to see is a listing agent that relates or has some sort of kind of concern for how we're actually going to get this done. I talked this morning with you, Mike, about a seller who said he just expected to be able to do post-closing occupancy, but he never asked anybody. I think we got to ask those questions. Hey, how do you plan on, you know, where are you going to be the day you actually have to close? Where are you going to move to? When's your flight? Do you have any travel plans this summer? Because are you going to be unreachable for 2-3 weeks at a time? I've heard that a lot recently, where they're on a cruise and you can't contact them for any number of reasons. Are you good on your cell phone? Can you sign using a cell phone? Or is there someone local that could have a power of attorney for you?
Right.
And then, Mike, this one's crazy, but you know about all the wire fraud that we're very concerned about?
Big concern.
It's huge. It's even worse when the seller is a foreign person. And because they might be in Italy and they're trying to sell their Naples property, their Marco property. And now I not only have to worry about cyber fraud, but cyber fraud where I'll never see the seller and they want me to send it overseas. So what we've done recently is we said, hey, before you go back to Italy, before you go to, you know, go home to Sweden or Canada even, you know, come to the attorney's office, fill out wire instructions now. That way we can meet with you, we can get a copy of your IDs, we can get your instructions, we can answer your questions, then you can go. But if you just never show up and all of a sudden you're just a name on a piece of paper, it makes it really hard to actually help that seller and counsel them correctly when there's already this doubt and I can't really remove it. Can you see how that might really help before the seller leaves?
Yeah, actually, you're hitting a very big area, and that is when you get that listing, that's great news, but you almost want to let the seller know we're kind of in this together.
Yeah.
And communication is the key, because some sellers want to be updated every week, and that's fine. Some might want to be updated, you know, longer periods or shorter periods. But then the more relevant question is, how do you want to be communicated to? Do you want it through text message, through email? Do you want a once a week phone call? Because each seller is different, and you can't assume that just shooting them a text, they're okay with that. They might not be big on texting.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
kind of a generational thing.
You and I talked to a couple of realtors that they were being bombarded by sellers. And hey, what are you doing today? What are you doing today? What are you doing today? And they had to have a pretty frank conversation with them and say, look, you know, this is going to take time. And what we should plan on is to talk at the beginning and the end of every week. And that way we're not, you know, we allow things to happen so that you feel like real progress is going on.
If you think about it, Christian, a lot of times the agent doesn't want to call the seller because he doesn't have anything to report, no offers, no contract, etc. But really, that's an opportunity.
Yeah,
it's an opportunity to discuss why there aren't any offers. Maybe the property's overpriced, or maybe it's the curb appeal, or maybe he needs to get the grass cut or whatever.
Yeah, or maybe you found the radon mitigation system in the closet and you never saw it before. And you go like, wait a second, we never talked about this. Yeah, I actually had someone tell me, they said, you know what you should do? You should always tell your client when you're going to call them. Say, hey, come, you know, whether I have something to tell you or not, you can expect a call from me every Wednesday. And that's when we'll make sure that we have time for each other, for questions, for updates, and for any changes that are going to be necessary.
I find it a lot easier if you just call on the way into work. And I did that this morning, actually, and I had nothing to report. But, you know, the two sticky issues, and I had to call a person about it and said, just wanted to let you know, I haven't heard back from so-and-so yet, or I'm expecting to hear from so-and-so, you know, later today. so I don't get half a dozen phone calls before 10 o'clock in the morning. If you don't call first, they're gonna bombard you, is my
Yeah,
point.
absolutely.
Well, you
this-
also, you hit another point, Christian, and that is, are you going to be traveling? And because a lot of the people down here, this is their second home and they are traveling.
Yeah,
And so how frustrating is that when you have a listing, an offer comes in and you can't find the seller?
yeah.
So
You know, it's
such a
crazy,
problem.
Mike. Over the last 6 months, I've had maybe a half a dozen sellers and buyers. So it's actually, they're both to blame, who plan a vacation on the closing date. That they're already gone on closing date, and then they make it our fault that they're out of town. Hey, you know, I can't do that date. I'm out of town, and I need to come in 3 weeks early. We need to move the closing up.
That sounds like something I would do. pretty
Yeah,
routine.
no, it happens.
Your mother
But
plans.
when
vacation.
you've asked them the question, are you going to be here all summer? And if you follow up, hey, are you going anywhere? What's going on? And are you, what's your health like? Where are your appointments? Whatever it might be, you need them available so that you can actually get your job done. Now, if you have to have solutions, and so I have maybe a dozen files where I have seller wiring instructions, copies of driver's license, and notes on our interaction before they went on vacation. And I don't even have a contract. I even have money on some of them, where the people put money in escrow knowing they would be gone. We already talked about the contracts that we would potentially use and how we would coordinate things. And I've got files set up for it. And it's only because they asked. I don't know otherwise, but that's something where you can provide all this extra service and you can tell your client, hey, this is no charge to you. I'll take care of everything. When in reality, I'm not charging them anyway. So I'm not charging you. I'm not going to charge them. It works. It helps me. And, it's a service we happily provide. We've gone on long enough. We could probably talk about a couple other things, like the type of contract you use with your seller, whether you want to use as is or a standard, and the pros and cons. We have other classes where we do talk about that, but really great turnout. Thank you so much for coming. On any of these topics, feel free to reach out to us directly. Always available to answer your questions. Thank you, Mike.
Hey,
Thanks,
Chris.
Dad.
Thank you.